Welcome, welcome, welcome to Off the Edge Deep Dive, the podcast where we jump headfirst into the most thrilling, thought-provoking, and sometimes jaw-dropping topics with your hosts, Cal and Tam. Let's take a deep dive into science, technology, culture, and everything in between. No shallow waters here, folks. So buckle up, because we're about to push the boundaries and go off the edge.
All right, so let's dive into something pretty fascinating, I think.
Yeah.
This is something that's been around as long as politics itself, appealing to social divisions for political gain. We've got a quote here that's attributed to Lyndon B. Johnson. And we're going to look at some analysis that connects this idea to modern political strategy. So get ready, because we're about to unpack this potent political tactic, and we're going to see how it might still be shaping things today. First up, this LBJ quote. It's a bit of a bombshell. If you can convince the lowest white man he's better than the best colored man, he won't notice you're picking his pocket. Hell, give him somebody to look down on and he'll empty his pockets for you.
Yeah, a very stark statement for sure. While the quote's exact origins are debated, it was reportedly a comment on some racist graffiti that he saw back in 1960. I think what really matters here is the core idea that it captures.
Okay, so what's the real takeaway here? Beyond the, colorful language, what's LBJ getting at it?
Well, I think he's highlighting a tactic, this tactic of exploiting existing prejudices and social divisions. And he's saying that it can be used as a tool for political gain by making one group feel superior to another. You can distract them from other agendas, maybe even things that aren't in their best interest. It's a way to kind of shift focus and potentially even exploit the situation.
So it's about creating a scapegoat. If people are busy pointing fingers at them, they might not notice what's happening right in front of them.
Exactly. And this brings us to our second source, an analysis of how this tactic might have been used in Donald Trump's 2024 re-election campaign.
Now, this is where things get really interesting. The analysis claims that Trump's campaign may have drawn on some of the same principles that we see in LBJ's quote. Of course, the context is totally different, but are we seeing the same basic play here?
Well, the analysis suggests there are some striking parallels. One example is how the campaign seemingly tapped into cultural grievances and identity politics, particularly among specific groups of voters who felt marginalized or overlooked.
So is this about tapping into existing anxieties and offering a simplified explanation, maybe even a scapegoat, instead of dealing with these complex issues?
That's one way to look at it. The analysis goes further, though. It suggests that the campaign also leveraged economic distrust and populism to its advantage. So instead of tackling complex economic issues head-on, they shifted blame for any economic anxieties onto specific groups or policies.
So instead of solutions, it's about finding someone to blame.
Essentially, yes. And this ties into the next parallel, the strategic mobilization of the base. By fostering that us versus them mentality, the campaign could solidify support amongst its core voters and motivate them to act. They're presented as being part of a group that's under attack, and that perception strengthens their loyalty.
It's fascinating how these tactics, even across such different time periods, can be so similar. But how effective was this approach, particularly when it came to appealing to working-class voters?
Well, the analysis suggests that this type of messaging, focused on economic hardship and cultural marginalization, it resonated with a significant portion of working-class white voters.
So they were looking for someone to blame for those hardships?
Well, it's more complex than that. Some argue that the campaign tapped into very real anxieties about economic shifts and changing demographics, and then offered simplified explanations and scapegoats instead of nuanced solutions. There's one more parallel the analysis highlights. The erosion of trust in institutions. Think about how certain media outlets were repeatedly labeled as fake news, or how the legitimacy of the justice system was called into question. That kind of rhetoric can really undermine people's faith in those traditional sources of information and in authority.
So people don't trust those sources. Who are they going to believe?
Exactly. It creates this environment where people are more likely to just accept information that confirms their existing biases, even if it's misleading or outright false. And then they might be less willing to consider alternative viewpoints because those are coming from sources they've been told to distrust.
It's like building a wall around your supporters, shutting out any information or perspectives that don't fit the narrative.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
And it creates a very real challenge for reasoned debate and for critical thinking.
So if we connect this back to LBJ's quote, are we essentially talking about a modern-day version of giving somebody to look down on?
In a way, yeah. It's about creating this us versus them dynamic where one group is seen as inherently superior or more deserving than another. And that kind of thinking can be very dangerous because it often leads to intolerance and discrimination.
It's almost like a shortcut to political power, isn't it? Instead of addressing these complex issues and finding common ground, you just find someone to blame and rally your supporters against them.
Yeah, it can be a very effective tactic in the short term, but it often comes at the expense of long-term progress and societal unity.
And it seems like social media just amplifies these tactics. People are constantly bombarded with information, much of it unverified, or intentionally misleading. How can we even begin to navigate that kind of environment?
It's definitely a challenge. We're all exposed to a lot of information these days.
Yeah.
From a lot of different sources. And it can be tough to sort through it all.
Do you have any tips on how we can become more discerning consumers of information, especially in this politically charged landscape?
Oh. One of the most important things is to be aware of your own biases. We all have them. And it's important to recognize how they might be shaping our perceptions. That means actively seeking out diverse viewpoints, even if they challenge our own beliefs.
So don't just stay in your echo chamber. Actually try to engage with people who have different opinions and see things from their perspective. It's not always easy, but it's crucial for developing those critical thinking skills and understanding the nuances of complex issues.
I agree. It's also important to be critical of the information you're consuming, regardless of where it comes from. Pay attention to the source, check the facts, and be wary of anything that seems overly sensational or emotionally charged.
That's good advice. It's so easy to get caught up in the drama and the outrage that often dominate online spaces.
It is. And that's why it's also crucial to be mindful of your own emotional responses. If you're feeling angry or fearful or outraged, take a step back and try to analyze why you're feeling that way. Is it because of the information itself? Or is it because of the way it's being presented?
That's a really important point. Emotions can be powerful motivators, but they can also cloud our judgment and make us more susceptible to manipulation.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to the core of this discussion, these tactics of exploiting social divisions and undermining trust. They're designed to appeal to our emotions, to bypass our rational thinking, and trigger a gut reaction.
So in a way, it's about taking back control of our own emotions and our reactions, not letting ourselves be manipulated by fear or anger or resentment.
Exactly. It's about recognizing these tactics for what they are and choosing to engage in a more thoughtful and nuanced way.
This has been incredibly insightful, but I'm curious, are there any examples of how these tactics might backfire or fail to achieve their intended goals?
Of course. Just because a tactic is used doesn't guarantee its effectiveness. There are many instances where attempts to exploit social divisions have fallen flat or even backfired.
I imagine. Trying to play on those divisions can sometimes alienate as many people as it attracts, especially if it comes across as inauthentic or opportunistic.
That's right. And sometimes those tactics can actually unify people against the very person or group that's trying to divide them.
It's like people seeing through the manipulation and saying, wait a minute, we're not falling for this again.
Precisely. And I think that's
a possible sign.
It suggests that people are becoming more aware of these tactics and more resistant to their influence.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a real push and pull happening here. On one hand, you've got these powerful forces that are trying to divide us. But on the other, there's also this growing awareness of these tactics and a desire to resist them.
Absolutely. I think people are increasingly recognizing the dangers of division and the importance of finding common ground. We're seeing more and more efforts to promote civil discourse, to bridge divides, that build a more inclusive society.
That's encouraging to hear. But let's be realistic for a moment. These tactics of appealing to social divisions, they're still incredibly effective, and they're likely to remain a part of the political landscape for the foreseeable future.
So where do we go from here? What can we do as individuals to navigate this complex and often manipulative environment?
That's a great question, and it's one that we all need to be grappling with. I think it starts with recognizing that we all have a role to play in shaping the kind of society we want to live in. We can't just sit back and passively consume information. We need to be active participants in the conversation. So it's about being informed, engaged, and being critical thinkers. Not just accepting everything we hear at face value, but really digging deeper and challenging our own assumptions.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that we all have biases, and those biases can influence how we interpret information. We need to be willing to step outside of our echo chambers, engage with diverse perspectives, and be open to the possibility that we might be wrong.
It's also about holding our leaders accountable, right? Not letting them get away with using these divisive tactics for their own gain.
Absolutely. We need to demand more from our leaders. We need to expect them to uphold ethical standards, to engage in a respectful dialogue, and to focus on finding solutions that benefit everyone, not just a select few.
So it's about demanding better, both from ourselves and from those in positions of power. It's about pushing back against these tactics and working towards a more just and equitable society.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, this has been a truly eye-opening deep dive. We've explored a lot of complex and challenging ideas. But I think the key takeaway here is that we're not powerless. We have the ability to recognize these tactics, to resist their influence, and to work toward a more positive and constructive future.
I wholeheartedly agree. It's about recognizing that we're all in this together and that we have a shared responsibility to create a better world.
And on that note, we want to leave you with a final thought to ponder. How can we become more aware of these manipulative tactics in our daily lives, not just in the political arena, but in all aspects of society? And how can we use that awareness to make more informed choices and contribute to a more just and equitable world? We encourage you to keep exploring these ideas and to share your thoughts with us and with each other.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. And until next time, keep those critical thinking caps on.
And that's a wrap for today's video. We hope you enjoyed the journey with us. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to stay up to date with all our latest content. A huge thanks to the makers at Boundaries Edge for bringing this to life. Be sure to check out the channel at Boundaries Edge for more exciting videos and deep dives. Until next time, keep pushing your boundaries to the edge.